The first thing Mara heard when she came into the world was her father's voice saying goodbye. Not to her. She wasn't out yet. He was talking to someone else entirely, a calm exchange over a comm channel, while the ship around him was tearing itself apart. She would learn this later. The way you learn all the important things. Slowly, in pieces, from people who had been there and still weren't sure how to talk about it. Her mother told her the story only once, sitting at the kitchen table on Mara's 16th birthday, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. He had 12 minutes, her mother said. 12 minutes in command of the Helix, and he spent every one of them getting people out. Her mother didn't cry. Elara Voss had done her crying 20 years ago, in a life raft, drifting through the debris field of a ship that no longer existed, while a child she hadn't named yet screamed against her chest. Mara joined the Interstellar Defense Corps the week after her 17th birthday. Not for revenge, she wasn't that simple, and she'd known enough people who'd tried that road to understand where it ended. She joined because she was good at it. Because the entrance aptitude scores put her in the 98th percentile across 4 categories and the 94th in a 5th. Because when the recruiter read her those numbers back to her, she'd felt something she hadn't felt since she was 8 years old, and her mother pointed at a faint smear of light in the night sky and said, "That's a nebula. That's where stars are born." She'd felt like the universe was a door with a handle on it. Commander Harlan Voss. Her father, a man she knew only through a grainy photograph, her mother kept on the refrigerator, a voice recording her mother never played but never deleted, had apparently felt the same way. The Carath didn't look like conquerors. That was the thing everyone got wrong before they met one. They were tall, maybe 2 meters, with a bilateral symmetry that felt almost familiar until you got to the face, which was wrong in ways that took the human brain a second to catalog. The jaw hinged the wrong direction. The nasal passages were twin vertical slits, and the eyes, there were 4 of them, arranged in a gentle arc, never blinked in unison. They moved gracefully, with a kind of unhurried precision that Mara had learned to interpret as something other than calm. That was how a Karath moved when it was angry, when it was calculating, when it had already decided and was merely waiting for the variables to finish catching up. Their ships were worse. The Nadir. That was what they'd named it in Terran intelligence files, after the lowest point of a celestial arc, had arrived out of a spatial compression event that the best physicists in the Union still didn't fully understand. It was the size of a small moon and bristled with weapons that fired in frequencies the old defense grid couldn't track. It had destroyed Callisto Station in 11 minutes, not because it had to, because that was how long it took the Carath commander to lose patience. When the Nadir drilled into Selos IV, a colony world, 80,000 people, mostly mining families, no one on the bridge of the IDS Perseverance understood at first what they were watching. The beam was too focused, too precise. It looked almost surgical. Commander Arash Tabi stood at the viewport for a full 30 seconds before anyone spoke. "They're drilling to the core," Lieutenant Prié said. She had a gift for stating impossible things calmly. Resonance frequency. They're going to destabilize it. Tabi turned to Mara. She was his senior tactical officer, 3 years in the role, and he had a habit of looking at her when the options ran out. She'd never decided if that was a compliment. "Can we stop it?" he said. "We can try to stop the drill," she said. "The platform they're running it from is externable. It's not part of the main ship." She paused. "But sir, the platform is in range of the Nadir's surface weapons. Anything we send in there." "I heard you. I'm saying the math doesn't work." "Do the math again." She did, 3 times. The math kept not working. On the surface of Selos IV, 80,000 people were watching a beam of focused light dig toward the center of their world, and no one in the known galaxy had a plan. The jump out of compression felt like being turned inside out, which it wasn't, technically. But the human nervous system didn't speak technical. Mara had experienced 37 compression jumps in her career, and she gagged on 33 of them. Today was number 38, and she gripped the armrest with one hand and breathed through her nose and managed, through sheer bloody-mindedness, not to add to her total. Behind her, she heard Specialist Idris, 22 years old, first deep space posting, lose his breakfast quietly into a bag. She didn't turn around. The Perseverance emerged from compression in the shadow of Selos IV's outer moon, running dark, passive sensors only. On Mara's display, the Nadir bloomed like a bruise against the planet's northern hemisphere. "Visual on the drill platform," Priya said. "Hull mounted, starboard secondary array." They've anchored it to the ionosphere with a gravity tether. She paused. It's elegant, actually. Don't, Tabby said. Commander. This was Mara. I need to tell you something. He looked at her. The math does work, she said. But not the way we were running it. We can't hit the platform from outside weapons range. But if someone gets on it, manually, they can overload the tether junction from the inside. The tether blows, the platform vents, the drill stops. She paused. Then they'd need to get off. A silence settled over the bridge that had its own particular texture. Time frame, Tabby said. 4 minutes to get there on the emergency sled. Maybe 3 minutes to find the junction and blow it. Then they'd need to jump clear before the vent. Current debris field makes the sled approach non-viable on the return. So they'd need... She looked at her own numbers and said the next part without flinching. They'd need someone on the Perseverance to get a transporter lock during the vent event. 7-second window. That's not a window, that's a slot. Yes. Tabby studied her. You're volunteering. I'm the only one who's done a live transporter intercept during a vent event. That was a training simulation. Still did it. Mara, sir. Her voice was steady. She was thinking about a grainy photograph on a refrigerator. She was thinking about 12 minutes. He had 12. I'm asking for 7. Let me go. The emergency sled was essentially a rocket with a seat, a handhold, and a helmet. It was built for maintenance runs on the ship's exterior, not for crossing 600 meters of contested space toward a drilling platform bristling with active energy output. The vibration started the moment she cleared the Perseverance's EM shadow and entered the Nadir's sensor envelope. A deep bone rattle that she felt in her back teeth. She flew low, using the ionosphere's interference as cover the way her father had once used debris from a destroyed escort vessel. She'd studied his flight recorder, found in the wreckage years later, recovered by a salvage crew that had no idea what they'd found. He'd been creative, resourceful. She'd gotten that from him, she supposed, from a man who'd been dead before she could walk. The platform loomed. Up close, it was enormous, much larger than the tactical display had suggested. A sprawling lattice of conduit and converter arrays, and, at its center, the drill emitter itself. A pillar of focused gravitational energy that looked like someone had bottled a tornado. It was beautiful the way a lot of dangerous things were beautiful. She didn't let herself look at it long. She hit the docking clamp and immediately the sled shrieked with proximity alarms. The Nadir's sensors had her. She had maybe 30 seconds before they reacted. She went over the side and ran. The tether junction was where the schematics said it would be, which was a small grace in a situation that had few others. It was a cubic housing, roughly the size of a cargo crate, bolted to the underside of the platform's main structural spine. The access panel was sealed with a Kareth security lock, which was a rotating crystalline matrix, effectively unpickable unless you knew the rotation sequence, which no human did. She didn't try to pick it. She pulled the shaped charge from her kit, placed it against the panel seam, unrolled the trigger line, crouched behind the structural spine, and pressed the detonator. The panel disappeared. The junction inside was a tangle of conduit runs and energy relays, and one large violet coupling that pulsed with each throb of the drill. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, mapping what she was seeing against what she'd memorized from the Kareth engineering schematics that the Union's intelligence division had spent 6 years and 11 lives obtaining. Then she pulled the coupling. Nothing happened. For exactly 2 seconds, nothing happened, and she had time to think. Wrong one. I pulled the wrong one. I came all this way, and I pulled the wrong 1 in 80,000 people, and she was already reaching for the secondary coupling when the platform shuddered like a struck bell. The tether, all 600 meters of it, the gravitational anchor that held the drill to the ionosphere, went inert at the base junction, and the recoil propagated upward through the platform in a shockwave she felt through her boots. The drill emitter stuttered. The tornado bottle light flickered, steadied, flickered again, and died. From somewhere below, kilometers down through atmosphere, she heard, or imagined she heard, the sound of a planet exhaling. The vent would follow in 60 seconds. The platform would blow its own emergency relief valves to prevent a catastrophic energy backfeed, and everything on it would be exposed to hard vacuum. She got on the open comm. Perseverance. I need that lock. Static. Perseverance. This is Voss. I need a transporter lock. Please respond. More static. She was looking at her wrist display. 50 seconds. We have you. This was Priya's voice, thin through the interference. We have a partial lock, Mara. The vent event is going to scatter the... I know what it's going to do. Get ready. 40 seconds. She walked to the edge of the platform. The planet below her was a curve of pale blue and amber, the drill hole in the northern hemisphere already closing, geological pressure doing what geological pressure does. She thought about her mother at a kitchen table with cold tea. She thought about a photograph on a refrigerator. She thought about the nebula her mother had shown her, the smear of light where stars were born. The vent siren started. Lock acquired, Priya said. Mara. The universe turned itself inside out. She came back to consciousness on the floor of the transporter bay with Specialist Idris kneeling next to her and Tabby standing in the doorway, looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Something had gone wrong with the lock, the partial lock, the scattered signal, and she'd come through in pieces that the transporter had spent a long, careful second putting back together. And the result was that she felt like she'd been assembled by someone who'd read a description of a human being, but never actually met one. Celosaphore, she managed. Intact, Tabby said. Drill's gone. 80,000 people are watching the nadir pull back. She lay on the floor for a moment longer. The ceiling of the transporter bay was the same neutral gray as every ceiling on every ship she'd ever served on. She stared at it. They'll come back, she said. Yes. They'll try it somewhere else. Yes. She sat up. The room swiveled, settled. Idris put a hand under her elbow and she let him. Then we'd better figure out why they're doing it, she said. Because this is the third colony world in 4 months, and it can't just be what it looks like. Tabi studied her for a long moment. It can't just be destruction for destruction's sake. No one destroys planets for pleasure, she said. Not even them. There's a logic to it. There always is. She looked at him. I want to know what they're afraid of. The answer, when it came from the wrong direction entirely. The Karath called themselves the Karath. Union intelligence services had known that for years without knowing much else. Their language was partially decoded. Their biology was roughly understood. Their history was almost entirely opaque. What they were not was a species with a grudge. They weren't, as best anyone could tell, territorial in the way that made expansion wars inevitable. They were old. Older than the Union. Older than the oldest human spacefaring record by a factor of perhaps 10. They had been out in the dark a long time. What they had not been, apparently, was alone. Mara found this in a 70-year-old xenology archive, buried under 3 layers of classification that had been quietly declassified during a bureaucratic reorganization that no one had flagged as significant. She found it because she was looking for something else and stumbled on it. The way you find the most important things. Sideways, while you were meant to be doing something else. The archive described first contact with a species called the Velhari, a species that was now extinct. The Velhari had been spacefaring. They had been civilized by any reasonable definition. They had been, according to the archive's dry assessment, expanding into a region of space that the Karath had long considered a buffer zone, an unpopulated margin that served some purpose the xenologists had never clarified. The Karath had removed them. Not through war, not through anything the archive characterized as aggression. They had simply made the planets uninhabitable, one by one, until the Velhari had nowhere to go. The archive noted, in its final paragraph, that Union surveyors had recently confirmed that several colony worlds established in the past 20 years fell within what the Karath had historically considered their buffer zone. The archive had been written 70 years ago. Mara sat with this for a long time. Then she wrote a report, filed it on every priority channel she could access, and went to find Commander Tabby. The thing about being right when no one wants you to be right is that it doesn't feel like winning. Her report made it through 3 levels of review before someone with authority read it and called her. He was a gray-haired admiral with the kind of face that had spent decades doing calculations it didn't like. He looked at her through the comm screen and said, "You understand what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm presenting findings. You're suggesting that the Karath aren't attacking us. You're suggesting they're managing a territory dispute in a way that has no room in it for negotiation. I'm saying they've done this before. I'm saying there's a pattern. The pattern you're describing means there's no way to stop them short of leaving, or short of making them understand that we're different." The Admiral looked at her. Different how? The Velhari didn't fight back. They didn't try to communicate. They didn't demonstrate anything that made them interesting. They just died, slowly. She kept her voice level. "We're not doing that. We've been fighting back for 2 years. That's unusual, from what I can find. The Karath have never encountered a species that sustained conflict. They've never had to adapt. You're saying we've already done the interesting part. I'm saying we need to be in a room with one of them. A long pause. There are 3 Kareth vessels currently holding position at the edge of the Callisto debris field, the Admiral said. They've been there for 9 days. They haven't engaged. They haven't communicated. They're waiting. For what? We don't know. Mara thought about this. Let me go find out. The shuttle was a diplomatic configuration. No weapons, beacon running at full power, identifier codes broadcast in the 3 frequency ranges that Kareth sensors were known to monitor. Mara sat in the co-pilot seat next to a woman named Commander Niele Oran, Union Diplomatic Corps, who had spent 12 years studying Kareth communication patterns and spoke approximately 40 words of what might charitably be called their language. This might not work, Oran said, for the 4th time. I know. They might just destroy the shuttle. I know. The most likely outcome. Commander Oran, Mara turned to look at her. I know the most likely outcomes. I've read the same odds you have. I'm here anyway. She paused. So are you. Oran was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I joined the diplomatic corps because I believed in contact. The possibility of it. The idea that if you could just find the right. She stopped. Most of my colleagues think I'm an optimist. Are you? I don't know anymore. Maybe I just have a low tolerance for the alternative. Mara thought about that. I had a colleague once who told me that humans are the only species in the known record who will charge straight into a fight they know they can't win, repeatedly, for no tactical reason other than that giving up felt wrong. She paused. He said it like it was a flaw. Orun smiled, small and tired. Maybe it is, maybe, Mara said, but we're still here. The Kareth vessel they approached was not the Nadir. It was smaller being relative. Roughly the mass of an aircraft carrier, and it made no move as the shuttle decelerated and came to rest in what Oran hoped was a recognized request posture. The beacon kept broadcasting. The silence stretched. Then the docking beam hit them. It wasn't an attack. It was a controlled tractor pull, firm but not aggressive, drawing the shuttle toward a bay that opened in the vessel's flank like a mouth. Oran watched it happen and said very quietly, Well, Mara agreed. The bay sealed around them. Atmo readings can confirm breathable, just, cold by human standards. Gravity at about 80%. When the bay door opened, 3 Kareth stood waiting. The one in the center was taller than the other 2 and wore a garment of heavy dark material that moved like water. Its 4 eyes regarded the 2 humans with an expression that Mara spent a long moment trying to read and ultimately couldn't. Orun stepped forward and spoke. What she said, in her 40-word approximation of Kareth, was something like, We came to understand. The tall Kareth was still for a long time. Then it spoke, a sound like stone grinding over stone with harmonics in a frequency that Mara felt in her sternum rather than her ears. Oren's handheld translator cycled through 17 attempts at parsing it and settled on something that was almost certainly incomplete. You are small and persistent. Yes, Mara said, stepping forward. We are. The tall Kareth's 4 eyes moved in sequence, which she was learning meant something like attention. Focus. You have it now. Do something with it. We know about the Velhari, she said. The translator rendered this in the Kareth approximation. We know about the buffer zone. We know you've been managing this region for longer than our civilization has existed. She paused. But we're not the Velhari. Orun was translating in real time, the hand device cycling and offering outputs she was reading and adapting. It was rough. It was probably missing things. Language was always missing things. You have fought, the translator offered. All others went. Yes, Mara said again. We fought. We'll keep fighting. Not because we want your territory. Because we don't leave. She thought of Silos the Orth. She thought of 80,000 people watching a beam drill toward their planet's heart. Those were our people on those worlds. You don't get to decide they're in the wrong place. They're not the wrong place. They're home. The Karath was very still. Why, it was such a simple question. Mara realized she'd been expecting something else, something grander, something that required a grander answer. But there it was, flat and honest. Why? She looked at Orun, who was watching her with an expression that meant, I don't know how to translate this. You're going to have to do it without the device. Mara looked at the Kareth. She thought about what to say. She thought about it for a long time, standing in a cold bay on an alien ship with the fate of every colony world hanging somewhere overhead. And then she stopped thinking about what to say and just said the thing that was true. Because they're ours, she said, because we love them. The translator produced something. She had no idea if it was right. The Kareth was still for so long she thought they'd lost it. Thought the conversation was over. Thought they'd come all this way for a silence and a docking beam, and nothing else. Then it moved, a gesture she didn't recognize, both upper limbs extended and turned palm down, and spoke again. This one, the translator offered, then cycled, then, is unusual, we know, Mara said. There were no treaties signed that day. It wasn't that kind of meeting. What it was a first conversation between two civilizations that had been at war without ever having spoken. And like all first conversations between people who matter to each other, it ended with more questions than it started with, and that was fine. The Kareth withdrew the 3 vessels from the Callisto field 48 hours later. They left a signal buoy, broadcasting in a frequency that took Union linguistics 6 weeks to fully decode. When they decoded it, it said roughly the way all translations are rough, something like, the persistent ones. We are watching. Not a threat, not entirely. Something more complicated. An acknowledgement. The note a predator leaves when it has looked at something smaller than itself and decided to look again. Commander Arash Tabi retired from service 8 months later. On a Tuesday, in a ceremony that Mara attended in her dress uniform, and at which she said nothing in public because she'd said everything she needed to say privately the week before, over 2 cups of terrible coffee in his office. He left the Perseverance to her. She stood on the bridge the morning after and looked out at the stars. Lieutenant Priya was at her station, running diagnostics. Specialist Idris, 23 now, no longer quite as green, was at navigation. The crew around her was familiar, particular, irreplaceable in the specific way that all crews are. You can replace a tactical officer or an engineer in terms of function, but you cannot replace the person who handed you a cup of something when you came back from a bad EVA. The person who made a particular joke at a particular moment. The person who knows without asking when to be quiet. She thought about her father, who'd had 12 minutes and used all of them. All right, she said to no one in particular and everyone. Let's see what's out there. Priya looked up. Course? Mara looked at the stars. She thought about a smear of light in a night sky. She thought about a door with a handle on it. Out, she said. There was a beat of silence and then id navigation completely straight-faced. That's not a coordinate, ma'am. Northeast, she said. Also not. Away from the station, Idris. Get us moving. Yes, ma'am, he said, and she could hear him smiling, and the engines came up beneath her feet with that low vibration she'd felt in 100 ships and would feel in 100 more if she was lucky, and the Perseverance moved. 6 months later, a Karath communication reached Union Command that was not a signal buoy. It was a directed transmission, addressed specifically to the IDS Perseverance. It translated over the course of 2 weeks of careful work to something like this. The persistent ones. We have counsel. There are things between our peoples which require. The voice that argued before yours, we request. The word the translation team settled on, after considerable debate, was conversation. Mara received this transmission on the bridge at a 600 with a cup of something that was technically coffee and practically an insult to the concept. She read it twice. Ma'am, Priya said. Standing orders on Karath communications were to route through command first. No, you're going to route through command first? Mara looked at the transmission. She thought about the bay of a Karath vessel, and a cold silence, and a question like a stone. Why? She thought about what she'd said, which had been the truest thing she could say, and which had been enough. No, she said. Draft a response. We're coming. Leave a light on. That's Priya considered it. That's not standard diplomatic protocol. No, the translation is going to be a nightmare. All the important ones are. Mara finished the coffee-adjacent substance and set the cup down. Get Oran on the line. Tell her to pack for cold weather. The last thing Mara's father had said, on the bridge of the Helix, in the 12 minutes that were all he ever got, was not heroic. She knew this because the flight recorder had captured it. He'd set it to the empty bridge. Most of the crew already evacuated, the ship nearly gone. While he was doing the calculations that would bring the vessel's mass into contact with an enemy that was going to kill a lot of people if he didn't, he'd said, Okay, let's go. She didn't know if he'd been afraid. She thought he probably was. She thought that was fine. She thought it was, in fact, the whole point. You could be afraid and still go. You could see the numbers that didn't work and run them again anyway. You could stand in the cold bay of an alien ship and say the truest thing you could say, and trust that truth was a kind of math that worked in any language. She'd been afraid in the bay. She'd been afraid on the platform over Silos IV, watching the vent sirens start. She'd been afraid for most of her career, which was, she had come to understand, simply what it felt like to be alive while doing things that mattered. The Perseverance came around in a long arc and pointed itself at the coordinates the Karath had sent, which were deep, past the edge of any chart the Union had ever drawn. New territory. Unknown space. The stars out there were older, stranger, packed with stories and languages nobody aboard had any idea how to read yet. "It's a long way," Idris said, "from navigation." "Yes," Mara said. "Do we know what we'll find?" She looked at the stars. "Something worth the trip," she said. "That's the bet. That's always been the bet." The engines went to full thrust. The Perseverance ran toward the dark, and the dark ran back, not in fear, but in the way that distance always moves when something comes at it fast enough, when something refuses to stop, when something has decided, against all reasonable calculation, that the frontier is not a wall, but a door. Space has always been that kind of door. Humanity figured that out a long time ago. We're still figuring out what's on the other side.